Elias Reeves was 41 years old, a man who had spent 14 years building a structural contracting company from a borrowed $12,000 and one second-hand transit van. He drove the same navy blue F-250 he'd had since 2017. The cab smelled like sawdust and black coffee. He came home on a Friday evening in January, let himself in through the side entrance, and heard his wife's voice before he reached the hallway, low and deliberate, not meant for him. She was on the phone. He stood at the edge of the hall. He heard every word. "He's richer than my husband," she whispered. "Marcus has real money, not the kind that stays invisible." She didn't know he was there. She didn't know what he had already built, and she had no idea what she was about to cost herself. Before we go any further, drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The side entrance of the house on Millbrook Drive still had the original hinges, the kind that didn't announce anyone. Elias had spent 14 years building Reeves Structural, not with investors or a family name behind him, but with sequencing logic and a willingness to be the last man on a job site. He drove the same truck. He wore the same Carhartt jacket on every site visit, the one with a frayed cuff he'd been meaning to replace for 2 winters. He kept his schedule in a worn leather planner because he had long ago stopped trusting cloud systems with his contract timelines. He was the kind of man who drove 2 hours on a Sunday to inspect rebar placement on a job his foreman had already signed off on, not because he doubted anyone, but because his name was on the permit, and he had long since stopped finding that distinction small. In the autumn of 2019, he had paid off a $410,000 lien on a commercial property he had acquired quietly, in his name only, in a suburb 40 minutes east of the city. He had not mentioned it to Nadia. He had been building toward something. He had assumed there would be a right moment to show her the full picture. He had no idea she had already made up her mind about what that picture contained. Then came the Friday in January, and everything that followed came from that hallway. The living room was still when he reached the doorway. The late afternoon light came in flat through the blinds, making the furniture look like outlines of itself. Nadia was seated at the kitchen table, turned slightly away from him, her phone held close. Her voice was the measured kind, not a whisper of discretion, but the careful register of someone who had chosen a word level that would carry only as far as necessary. He hadn't announced himself. He didn't now. "He took me to the Seraphine last month," she said. "The private suite." A pause. It's not even a conversation about ambition. It's just, Marcus lives differently. He lives like a man who knows what he has. Another pause. "I know what you're going to say." Her voice shifted slightly, softer, as if she were agreeing with something she'd been told before. "But Elias is never going to be that. He drives that truck. He has the planner. He's steady. But steady and enough are 2 different things. Marcus has real money, not the kind that stays invisible." Elias stood at the edge of the hall. He counted 6 seconds. Then he heard the sentence she saved for the end of conversations that had already moved past the point of return. "He's richer than my husband." He did not move toward the kitchen. He did not call her name. He did not clear his throat. He walked back to the side entrance with the same quiet his work boots had always carried on a finished floor, and he stood on the step outside for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. He had noticed something before he turned. On the small table near the kitchen pass-through, the one where they stacked mail, there was a folder, blue, with a typed label he had never seen before. Meridian Property Advisors. He had never heard that name. He did not reach for it. He filed it away and stepped back outside. He got in the truck. He drove east toward the commercial site, sat in the parking lot for 47 minutes, and looked at the building he had just finished paying off. The one with his name on the deed. The one she didn't know existed. Then he drove home, came through the front door, and said hello. She said hello back. They ate dinner. He asked about her week. She said work had been manageable. He noticed she did not ask about his. He set his fork down on the edge of his plate with the same care he used for everything. He said he was tired. He went to bed. He lay there in the dark, and he thought about the way she had said the word invisible. 3 years before that January, Nadia had not known the word meridian or any of the names that would eventually matter. What she had known, in the early years, was a man who came home tired and washed his hands twice at the sink before sitting down at the table. A man who had borrowed $12,000 from his uncle in the spring of 2010 to buy a used transit van and a set of second-hand scaffolding, and who had spent the following 2 years doing subcontracting work at margins most people wouldn't have accepted. She had seen the contracts come in. She had seen the folders on the desk grow. What she had not tracked was the trajectory. The difference between the man who borrowed $12,000 and the man who, by the end of the 7th year, had quietly taken on 3 full crews and a licensing expansion she had signed a document for and not asked about. In the winter of 2020, she had been preparing for her own professional licensing exam, a 6-month process that would require long evenings and concentrated weekends. Elias had taken on the administrative paperwork for the house during those months, the insurance renewals, the property tax filings, the Ho correspondence. He had also driven to her mother's place twice a month to help with a water pressure issue in the second bathroom that required a licensed plumber and paperwork the building association wouldn't process without a professional signature. He had handled all of it. She had thanked him once, a few days after the exam. He had said he was glad she passed. There had been a gap, even then. He had noticed it the way a structural inspector notices a hairline in a foundation wall. Not alarming, not yet conclusive, but worth tracking. She had started a new habit of coming home on Thursdays and changing into different clothes before they went to dinner. He had asked once, and she had said she kept extra clothes at the office for after-work things. He had accepted the explanation the way he accepted most things. By filing it, not releasing it, and choosing to believe in the structure he'd invested in. A colleague of his named Preston, who had worked beside him on a commercial build in the North District, had said something to him once. Over coffee, after a site walkthrough, the kind of thing said plainly and without ceremony. "You're not the flashiest contractor in the room," Preston had said, "but you're the one everyone calls when it actually has to work." Elias hadn't held on to it at the time. He had simply noted it and moved on. That was the thing she had never considered worth knowing, that the most significant parts of what he had built were never the ones visible from the outside. He had applied that principle to job sites for 14 years. He had applied it to everything else, too, including himself. Her name was Loretta Gaines. She lived 14 minutes from the house on Millbrook Drive, in a narrow 2-bedroom she had owned outright since 2003. She was 63 years old, small and composed, with silver hair she kept pinned simply, and she had 22 years of records from her time as a paralegal at a property transactions firm on the north side of the city. Loretta had known Elias since before Reeves Structural had a name. She had helped him read his first commercial lease agreement. She had watched, over the years that followed, with the particular attention of someone trained to recognize patterns in documentation and human behavior simultaneously. She had called him on the Tuesday after the Friday in January. "I need you to come by," she said, not over the phone. He was there in 40 minutes. The house was warm. She had tea on the table and 4 folders organized by date. "I'm going to tell you everything I saw," she said. "And then I'm going to show you what I kept. I need you to let me get through all of it." He sat down. He said, "All right." She started with the Meridian Property Advisors folder. She had recognized the name 3 weeks earlier from a referral chain she'd traced through a public business filing. Meridian was a boutique advisory firm specializing in wealth relocation structuring, the kind of service retained not by contracting business owners, but by the people who sat across from them. She had requested a copy of a public disclosure associated with the firm. She set the first document on the table. It connected Meridian to a man named Marcus Webb, a property developer with significant visibility in the city's commercial leasing market, and, according to the debt-to-asset disclosures she had located through 2 public filings, an exposure ratio that had not yet become widely known. Elias looked at the document. He looked at the name. He had heard that name once before. At a fundraising dinner Nadia had attended the previous September. She had mentioned Marcus Webb the way someone mentions a name they have known longer than they are letting on. He had filed it away at the time. He had not reached a conclusion. Now it made complete sense. Loretta placed the second document beside the first. It was a transfer record from a savings account held in Nadia's name, an account she had opened 18 months ago, separately, without discussion, into a joint holding vehicle associated with the Meridian structure. The amount? $63,000. Moved in 3 increments. $11,000, $22,000, $30,000. Each one positioned just under the reporting threshold, dated across 4 months. Elias picked up his tea. He set it down. "There's more," Loretta said. The third item was a set of consulting invoices, 2 of them, billed from a shell entity linked to Marcus Webb's Meridian structure and funded through an account Nadia administered. The invoices described services that corresponded to no professional activity in either party's recorded business history. Total, $88,400. Over 14 months, Loretta set the documentation in a folder and placed it on the table without comment. She had a particular gift for presenting information at the weight it already carried, without adding to it. "There's a 4th item," she said. She placed the final folder on the table. Inside, a letter from a firm Elias recognized, dated 3 weeks before the January Friday, addressed to Nadia. It outlined the terms of a financial instrument that, if executed, would leverage his home equity without requiring his co-signature, through a documentation process he had never been made aware of. He read the first paragraph. He turned it face down on the table. He set it down with care. He sat there for a moment. Then, he stood. He moved around the table and looked at all 4 folders open at once, the complete structure of it visible from above. He read it the way he read a job site plan, not focusing on any single element, but scanning the whole layout until the connections between elements resolved into a clear sequence. He could see it. How one decision led to the next. Who had benefited at each step. How long it had been in motion while he had been occupied with other things. "I need an attorney," he said. Loretta nodded. "I already have one in mind," she said. "He's been waiting for your call." He didn't act immediately. That was the thing she had never found a way to account for, because she had never needed to watch him apply his patience to something that actually mattered to him. She had watched him be patient with city inspectors who made him wait 4 hours for a 30-minute walkthrough. She had watched him be patient with clients who changed load-bearing specifications 3 weeks before concrete was scheduled to pour. She had read those pauses as the ceiling of what he was capable of. She had not understood that patience was the discipline he had spent his entire professional life developing. She had simply never needed to watch him use it. The attorney's name was Lawrence Odell. He called Elias at 6:14 on a Wednesday morning, not out of inconsideration, but because he had been up since 4:30 pulling records, and he worked in a sequence that didn't accommodate ordinary hours. Within 11 days, Lawrence had identified 3 documentation irregularities in the equity instrument letter, filing gaps that, if the instrument had been submitted as is, would have constituted fraud in a civil proceeding. "There's more," Lawrence said. He brought in a forensic accountant named Priya Sahani on the 3rd week. She moved through financial records the way Elias moved through structural blueprints, not looking for one thing, but scanning for the architecture of what was there and where the load-bearing elements had been placed. What she surfaced within 6 days confirmed and extended everything Loretta had found. The $63,000 transfer, the $88,400 in consulting invoices, and a third layer, a paper trail connecting the shell entity that had processed the invoices to 2 other LLC structures, both of them registered in the same month. Both of them listing a Meridian managing partner as their registered agent. A plan, not an impulse. On the 27th day, Nadia called. He didn't pick up. He listened to the voicemail that evening. Her voice was measured, reasonable, the kind of reasonable that required preparation to sustain. She wanted to discuss a fair resolution. She hoped they could handle things without attorneys. She said she thought they both deserved that. Her second voicemail, 2 days later, sounded like something she had revised. The architecture was the same, but the edges were softer in places, and something sharper was showing through the softness. He listened to both of them, once each. On the 31st day, he called her back. His tone was cooperative. Level, he said he thought she was right. A resolution without courtrooms would be better for everyone. He suggested they meet with counsel present to formalize the terms. She agreed before he finished the sentence. He could hear the relief she was working to keep out of her voice. He ended the call. Lawrence was across the table, watching him. "She thinks it's already resolved," Elias said. Lawrence said nothing. He refilled his coffee. 11 days before the meeting, Priya confirmed the final piece. The property co-ownership application. A residential unit in a development Marcus Webb had opened in the Eastern District had been submitted under Nadia's name with a financing source listed as a structured withdrawal from the marital equity position. It had been submitted 4 days after the Friday in January. She had moved fast, once she had decided to move. Elias reached the building 17 minutes before anyone was expected. He preferred it that way. The conference suite on the 14th floor of Ashford & Partners had the particular stillness that comes from rooms designed to be neutral. A long table, flat light, the city visible through glass on one side, everything in muted gray and slate. A place where things were settled, not performed. Lawrence arrived at 8:43, followed by Priya. Documents went on Elias's side of the table, arranged in sequence. No visible urgency. The work had been done. This was simply the part where it was presented. Nadia arrived at 9 o'clock with her attorney, a man named Clifford Burns, who came in with the easy posture of someone who had already decided how the morning would go. She looked at Elias once across the table, a brief, professional acknowledgement. Then, she turned her attention to Lawrence, as if Elias were simply another party to proceedings she intended to manage. Lawrence addressed the room. Before any discussion of settlement terms, he said, "There are several matters requiring acknowledgement by all parties present." He opened the first folder and began placing documents on the table. Unhurried, methodical, the pace of a man who had done this before and was not nervous about it. The first document, the transfer record, 3 increments, 4 months, each position just under the reporting threshold. While Mr. Reeves was managing a commercial build-out in the Eastern District, Lawrence said, this transfer was executed from an account in Mrs. Reeves' name into a structured holding vehicle associated with Meridian Property Advisors. The amount, $63,000. It was moved without his knowledge or consent. He let the numbers sit for 8 seconds. A civil action has already been filed in connection with this transaction. Priya placed the second document on the table. Lawrence walked through it. No elevation, no performance. The consulting invoices, the shell entity, the dates, September 4th and February 11th. The structure that had received the funds, who had administered it, what it had been used to fund. Nadia's expression had not moved, but the effort required to keep it in place was visible to anyone paying close attention. Elias was paying close attention. The third document, the equity instrument letter. I want to be precise about what we are presenting today and what we are not, Lawrence said. We are not making representations about criminal exposure in this room. What we are doing is confirming that this documentation exists, that it has been fully preserved, and that it will form part of the record going forward. Clifford Burns looked up from the page for the first time since sitting down. The ease he had arrived with had left his expression. Lawrence set a fourth folder at the center of the table. Inside, the complete asset documentation for Reeves Structural Holdings. 5 commercial properties, 3 owned outright, 2 in active development. The portfolio valuation as of current assessment, $3 million. The silence that followed lasted 11 seconds. Elias counted every one of them. We'll allow time for review, Lawrence said. Elias stood. He took nothing from the table. He had brought one folder, and it had served its purpose. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Lawrence's hand. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned. He looked at Nadia directly, not loudly, not for the room. For her, because it was meant for her specifically. You said the money I had was the kind that stayed invisible, he said. You were right. I built it that way. I just didn't build it for you. He walked out. He did not look back. It didn't unravel in a single week. The Meridian structure Marcus Webb had assembled over 4 years had been designed to look solid from the outside. The suites, the development addresses, the name on the right letterheads. What had not been visible was the debt-to-asset exposure running underneath it. When the civil filings surfaced and 2 institutional lenders reviewed their positions, the reviews became their own proceedings. By March, the Eastern District development had stalled. By May, the co-ownership application Nadia had submitted under her name was formally voided. The financing source she had listed no longer existed in the form she had described. She was carrying the full weight of the choices she had made. Not dramatically, just constantly, the way a load that cannot be set down is carried. Professional relationships that had flowed through Elias's name, his licensing credentials, his network of contractors and project managers, went quiet when her inquiries arrived. Contractors who had worked beside Reeves Structural for years received her calls politely. They did not return the follow-up. Elias was building something. He was not in a hurry. He never had been. His name was on the new plans for a mixed-use development in the North Quarter, a project with a scope that had genuinely surprised him when the contract terms were finalized. He had 4 crews running and a 5th starting in August. He returned every message the same day. He gave timelines and met them. 14 months after the conference room, Reeves Structural moved its operations into a permanent office on the 3rd floor of a building on Carver Avenue, a building Elias had purchased and renovated himself in the district where he had first started. The sign on the door was small. His name. The year established. Nothing more than what it needed to be. He had a framed copy of the deed to the first commercial property, the one east of the city, the one she had never known about, hung on the wall beside the window. He had hung it himself, on a Tuesday morning before anyone else arrived, using a chalk line and a proper anchor, because a frame hung carelessly was a frame that eventually fell. He ran his thumb along the bottom edge. Satisfied, he went to his desk. On an early September morning, Elias was in the office before the crew arrived. He made his coffee the same way he always had, the same small French press, the same grind, the same 2 minutes he gave it before pressing. He stood at the window while it steeped and looked at the street below. A delivery truck. A woman moving fast with a cup in her hand. The neighborhood finding its early rhythm. His name was on the permit in the window. His name was on the deed in the filing cabinet. His name was on the plans spread across the table behind him. He heard the first of his crew coming up the stairs. He picked up his coffee. He turned from the window and went to the table. He had a timeline to review and 3 calls to return before noon. He sat down. He picked up the pencil. He got to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've got 2 more picked out that I think you'll really enjoy.